My best friend slept with my boyfriend at 18, just to prove she could, then came back 17 years later calling my 16-year-old son, mature for his age, and texting him, "When you turn 18, everything will be different." When I told her to stop or else I'd make her, she rolled her eyes and said, "You're just jealous he talks to me." I just stared at her, already planning on ruining her life. Mia and I were best friends from age 8 to 18. She was always the wild one, dating older guys and getting us into trouble, while I kept her from completely self-destructing. She had this thing about going after people she couldn't have, like our friends' older brothers, or even trying to flirt with our married history teacher. Nothing happened, but she loved the power of making men want her. So when she slept with my boyfriend of 2 years just to prove she could, I wasn't surprised, and cut her off completely. That was 17 years ago. Fast forward to 3 months ago when she messages me on Facebook. She's been through therapy and wants to apologize. She's some hotshot marketing executive now and never had kids, which she says is her biggest regret. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet for coffee. She seemed genuinely different and kept asking about my son Ethan. He's 16, brilliant at coding but awkward with girls. When she commented that shy boys are always the deepest, something felt off, but I ignored it. She started coming around bringing Ethan expensive gaming gear and offering tech industry connections. Ethan, who barely talks to adults outside family, was for some reason immediately drawn to her. She'd play online games with him late at night, and I'd find them laughing on the couch sitting way too close. She kept telling him how mature he was for his age and buying him cologne because girls noticed these things. Then she accidentally sent him a suggestive photo meant for her dating app. She apologized in our group chat, but privately asked Ethan if she looked good for 35. When I confronted her about boundaries, she gaslit me saying I was projecting and just jealous that Ethan finally had a confident female influence. After a big fight, she stayed away for a week, then came back crying and promising to respect boundaries. For a month, things seemed better, but then Ethan started being secretive with his phone and wearing the cologne she bought. I checked our phone bill and found hundreds of texts to an unknown number. When I confronted him, he admitted it was Mia on a burner phone. She'd told him I was controlling and didn't understand their special connection. The text made me physically sick because she was using textbook grooming language about how he wasn't like other boys and how she had feelings she shouldn't have, but when he turned 18, everything would be different. At Ethan's basketball game last week, Mia showed up uninvited taking photos from the stands. After the game, she whispered something to him that made him blush. His friend Marcus pulled me aside and showed me texts where Ethan was planning to meet someone special at a hotel for his 17th birthday. Marcus begged me not to tell Ethan he snitched, but saw how Mia was around him and thought it was gross. When I confronted Ethan, he broke down and admitted Mia said she was falling for him and wanted to celebrate his birthday privately, but would wait until he was 18 to make it official. I hired a PI who discovered Mia was fired from her last job for an inappropriate relationship with a 19-year-old intern. She specifically targets young men with single mothers and has searched out divorced women with teenage sons on Facebook to reconnect with. I knew I had to protect Ethan, but I also wanted her to face consequences, so I pretended not to know about the hotel plan and invited her to a birthday dinner the night before, saying I was taking Ethan on a trip that weekend. I spent days collecting evidence and met with what I thought was just a family lawyer. Then at dinner, Mia showed up with an expensive gift calling Ethan handsome and checking her phone constantly. She mentioned having plans later, which made me sick knowing what she meant. I was trying to act normal when two people in suits approached our table. They flashed badges. One was a detective, one from the DA's office. They said they were there about solicitation of a minor. I was completely shocked because this wasn't my plan. I realized my ex-husband must have gone to the authorities when I told him. Mia went ballistic, screaming that I set her up and didn't understand what I'd done. As they dragged her out, she turned and yelled that there was no proof she did anything wrong. I hated to admit it, but she was right. The bare minimum I had was enough to get a case started, but I needed to record their meetup at the hotel. The detective said they needed to speak with me and Ethan tomorrow, then left me sitting there with the check and knowledge I might not be able to save my son staring at me in shock. The next morning, I barely slept. I kept replaying every interaction looking for something I missed. The detective called early and asked us to come to the station at 10. Ethan was quiet during breakfast and wouldn't look at me. His eyes were red like he'd been crying. I made his favorite pancakes with chocolate chips, but he just pushed them around his plate. On the drive to the station, he finally spoke up and asked if he was in trouble. His voice cracked when he asked. I told him absolutely not, and that he was the victim here. He started crying and said he felt stupid and embarrassed. I pulled over in a grocery store parking lot and hugged him tight. I told him predators are good at what they do and none of this was his fault. I reminded him how smart and kind he was, and that Mia took advantage of those qualities. At the station, they separated us for interviews. The building smelled like burnt coffee and disinfectant. I went first and told them everything I knew. The detective, a woman named Catherine with kind eyes and graying hair, was patient but thorough. She asked about the burner phone and I gave her the number I'd found on our bill. She asked if I had any of the texts and I showed her screenshots I'd taken when Ethan was in the shower. She nodded and took notes, mentioning they already had significant background from the PI's report and my lawyer. When she asked if there was anything else, I mentioned the suggestive photo, but Ethan had deleted it. After 2 hours, they brought Ethan in. He looked pale and scared, smaller somehow in the fluorescent lights of the interview room. Catherine asked if he wanted me there and he nodded quickly. She started with easy questions about how he met Mia and their friendship. Ethan was honest about the gaming and the gifts, his voice getting stronger as he talked. When she asked about the texts, he got quiet again. Catherine was patient and told him again he wasn't in trouble and that nothing he said would get him in trouble. Then Ethan did something I didn't expect. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and opened a hidden folder disguised as a calculator app. Inside were dozens of photos Mia had sent him. Not just suggestive, but explicit. My stomach dropped and I had to grip the table to steady myself. Catherine's eyes went wide and she immediately put on gloves before taking the phone. Catherine immediately called in another detective and a forensic specialist. They took Ethan's phone as evidence and had him write out a detailed statement about when and how he received each photo. The photos changed everything. Combined with the PI's findings about her pattern of behavior, this was concrete proof of soliciting a minor. Catherine explained that with this evidence, Mia would likely take a plea deal to avoid trial. She said cases like this rarely go to trial when there's photographic evidence, especially with the volume Ethan had saved. I felt relief, but also guilt that my son had been carrying this burden alone, too ashamed and confused to tell me what was really happening. The forensic specialist, a young guy named Timothy with thick glasses and a nervous habit of pushing them up his nose, started going through Ethan's phone right there. He kept making notes on a yellow legal pad and taking pictures of the screen with some special camera that made clicking sounds. Catherine asked Ethan when the photos started, and he said about 3 weeks after Mia got the burner phone. At first they were just selfies, then gradually more revealing. She'd send them late at night with messages about how she trusted him and how special their connection was. Timothy found over 40 photos total, plus videos I didn't even know about. My hands were shaking so bad I had to sit on them, pressing down hard against the cold metal chair. Catherine left to make some calls while we waited. Ethan kept apologizing, and I kept telling him it wasn't his fault. The waiting room had these awful plastic chairs that squeaked when you moved, and a water cooler that made gurgling sounds every few minutes. Other people came and went, some crying, some angry. A woman across from us held a tissue box in her lap like a lifeline. After what felt like hours, Catherine came back with a woman from the DA's office. She introduced herself as Amy Hill and explained the next steps in a calm, professional voice. They had enough for an arrest warrant and would pick up Mia within the hour. She said with this evidence and her documented history, Mia would likely get 2 to 5 years and have to register as an intimacy offender. The whole time Amy was talking, I kept thinking about how I'd missed this. All those late-night gaming sessions suddenly looked different. We left the station around 3 in the afternoon. Ethan hadn't eaten since breakfast, so I took him to his favorite burger place, the one with the red vinyl booths and checkered floor. He ordered his usual double cheeseburger but only ate half. We sat in a booth by the window and watched people walk by living their normal lives. He asked if Mia would go to jail, and I said probably. He nodded and went back to picking at his fries, separating them into neat little piles. I asked if he wanted to talk about it, and he shook his head. Then he asked if we could go home and just watch movies. I said of course, and we left the rest of our food on the table. At home, I made popcorn while Ethan picked a movie. He chose some superhero thing we'd seen a dozen times, but I didn't care. We sat on the couch under the big fleece blanket his grandmother made, the one with the stars and moons pattern. About halfway through, he fell asleep with his head on my shoulder. I didn't move for the rest of the movie, just sat there listening to him breathe and thinking about everything that happened. My phone kept buzzing, but I ignored it. Whatever it was could wait. Around 6, my ex-husband Daniel showed up. I'd texted him that we were home but hadn't given details. He took one look at Ethan passed out on the couch and motioned for me to follow him to the kit Lynn. I carefully extracted myself and covered Ethan with the blanket, tucking it around his shoulders. In the kit, Lynn Daniel was pacing, his face red and his jaw clenched tight. He started yelling about how he should have known, how he should have done something sooner. I told him to keep his voice down and that none of us saw it coming. He slammed his hand on the counter and said that was the problem. We argued in whispers for 20 minutes before I told him to leave. Ethan didn't need to wake up to us fighting. After Daniel left, I checked my phone. 15 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize and twice as many texts. Word had gotten out somehow. Marcus's mom had texted asking if Ethan was okay. 2 other basketball moms wanted to know what happened at the restaurant. I turned my phone off and went back to the couch. Ethan was awake, staring at the TV without really watching. I asked if he heard us arguing and he said no, but I could tell he was lying by the way he wouldn't meet my eyes. We ordered Chinese food and ate it straight from the containers while watching another movie. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. I heard him moving around his room at 2 in the morning, the floorboards creaking under his feet. I knocked and found him sitting at his desk staring at his computer screen. He'd been looking at Mia's Facebook page. All her posts were still there, including ones about how proud she was of him. There was one from 2 weeks ago calling him her favorite person with a picture of them at an arcade, both holding stuffed animals they'd won. The comments were full of her friends saying how sweet it was that she was mentoring him. I gently closed the laptop and suggested some warm milk. We sat at the kit Lynn table in the dark, neither of us talking. The next morning, Catherine called early. They'd arrested Mia at her apartment the night before. She'd tried to run, but they caught her in the parking garage. She was being held without bail pending a hearing. Catherine said Mia's lawyer was already trying to negotiate a plea deal. She warned us that Mia might try to contact us through friends or family and to document everything. She also gave us the name of a therapist who specialized in cases like this. I wrote it down on the back of an envelope and stuck it to the fridge with the pizza magnet Ethan made in 3rd grade. Ethan didn't want to go to school, but I didn't push it. We spent the day doing normal things like laundry and grocery shopping. At the store, he stayed close to me, not wandering off to look at magazines like usual. An older woman commented on what a helpful son I had, and Ethan just nodded politely. In the cereal aisle, he suddenly asked if everyone would know what happened. I told him we could control who knew, and that his privacy was important. He grabbed a box of Lucky Charms and didn't say anything else. That afternoon, Mia's mom called. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She kept saying Mia didn't mean it, and that this was all a misunderstanding. She begged me to drop the charges and said Mia was getting help. I tried to explain that I couldn't drop charges, that it was out of my hands now. She called me horrible names and said I was ruining her daughter's life over nothing. I hung up when she started screaming about lawsuits. My hands were shaking again. Over the next few days, we fell into a weird routine. Ethan would go to school, come straight home, and lock himself in his room. I'd make dinner and he'd eat just enough to keep me from worrying. His friend Marcus came by once, but Ethan wouldn't see him. I heard Marcus tell his mom that everyone at school was talking about it. Apparently someone's parent worked at the restaurant and saw Mia get arrested. The story had morphed into something even worse than what actually happened. I called the school counselor, but she said unless Ethan came to her directly, there wasn't much she could do. A week after the arrest, Catherine called with an update. Mia's lawyer was pushing for a deal. 2 years in prison, 5 years probation, and lifetime registration as an intimacy offender. The DA thought it was fair given the evidence. She said trials were hard on victims, and this would spare Ethan from testifying. I asked Ethan what he thought, and he just shrugged. Later, I found him crying in his room, curled up on his bed with his old teddy bear. He said he didn't want her to go to prison, but also never wanted to see her again. I held him while he sobbed and told him both feelings were okay. The therapist Catherine recommended was named Dr. Sarah Lynn. Her office was in a converted Victorian house with a garden out front full of sunflowers. Ethan was nervous about the first appointment, so I went in with him. Dr. Lynn was younger than I expected, with a calm voice and kind smile smile. She had drawings from other young patients on her walls. She explained that what Ethan experienced was trauma, and it would take time to process. She gave him a journal and suggested writing down his feelings. Ethan actually seemed lighter after that first session. On the drive home, he even asked if we could get ice cream. 2 weeks passed in a blur of therapy appointments, school meetings, and legal phone calls. Ethan was doing better, talking more, and even hanging out with Marcus again. Then Mia's sister Emily showed up at our door. I recognized her from Facebook photos. Same dark hair as Mia, but softer features. She was holding a letter and crying. She said Mia wanted Ethan to know she was sorry, and that she never meant to hurt him. I took the letter without opening it and told Emily to leave. She begged me to read it, said Mia was destroyed by what happened. I closed the door in her face. I gave the letter to Catherine unopened. She said it was good I didn't read it or show Ethan. Contact attempts were common in these cases, and could be considered witness tampering. She added it to the file and said it might actually help the prosecution. That night, I found Ethan looking at old photos on his phone, not the ones Mia sent, but regular pictures of them gaming or at the arcade. He asked if it was weird that he missed the fun parts. I told him it wasn't weird at all, that predators were good at creating happy memories to confuse their victims. The plea hearing was set for a month later. Catherine said we didn't have to attend, but the judge would consider a victim impact statement. I asked Ethan if he wanted to write one, and he said he'd think about it. Dr. Lynn helped him process the decision in therapy. She said whatever he chose was the right choice. Some victims found it empowering to speak their truth, while others needed to stay away from the legal process. There was no wrong answer. Meanwhile, life kept moving forward. Ethan rejoined the robotics club at school and started working on a project for the state competition. He still had bad days where he'd barely talk, but the good days were becoming more frequent. His grades had slipped during everything, but his teachers were understanding. His English teacher, Mrs. Peterson, even offered extra credit to help him catch up. Small kindnesses like that made me tear up in my car after drop-off. Then came the Facebook messages. Mia had created fake accounts and was sending friend requests to Ethan's classmates. She was asking about him, trying to find out how he was doing. One girl named Megan screenshotted the messages and gave them to the school counselor, who called me immediately. I forwarded everything to Catherine, and she got a restraining order that covered social media contact. The judge warned Mia's lawyer that any more attempts would violate her plea agreement and could result in additional charges. 3 weeks before the hearing, Ethan decided he wanted to write a statement. He worked on it with Dr. Lynn, writing and rewriting until he felt it said what he needed. He wouldn't let me read it, said it was private until he was ready. I respected that, even though I was curious. He kept the printed copy in a folder in his backpack, carrying it everywhere like it might disappear. The robotics project became Ethan's focus. He stayed after school every day working on code for their robot. His teacher, Mr. Williams, said he'd never seen Ethan so dedicated. The competition was the same week as the plea hearing, which felt like the universe's cruel joke. But Ethan said he wanted to do both, that he needed to do both. I watched him soldering circuits one afternoon and marveled at his steady hands. Mine still shook sometimes when I thought about everything. A week before the hearing, Mia's mom called again. This time she was calmer, sadder. She asked if she could just understand what happened, why her daughter was going to prison. Against my better judgment, I met her for coffee at a quiet place downtown. She looked older, grayer than the photos I'd seen. She cried quietly as I explained what Mia had done. She kept shaking her head and saying she didn't raise her daughter to be this way. When I left, she hugged me and apologized. I sat in my car afterward and cried for both of us. The robotics team made it to the state finals. Ethan's code worked perfectly, and their robot completed every challenge. Watching him high-five his teammates made my chest tight with pride and sadness. This was who he really was. Brilliant and kind and full of potential. Mia had tried to steal that, but she failed. After they won third place, Ethan hugged me in front of everyone, not caring who saw. His friend Billy took a picture of us with the trophy that I later framed. 2 days before the hearing, I finally read Ethan's statement. He'd left it on the Kitlin table with a note saying he was ready for me to see it. I made coffee and sat down to read. He wrote about feeling special and then feeling stupid, about being confused and ashamed and angry, about how Mia made him think he was mature but really made him feel like a little kid, about wanting to protect other kids from people like her. By the end, I was sobbing into my coffee mug. My son had found words for things I couldn't even process. The night before the hearing, neither of us could eat dinner. We picked at takeout pizza and watched old sitcom reruns. Ethan asked what would happen tomorrow, and I explained the process Catherine had outlined. The judge would review the plea deal. Mia would have to admit guilt, and then sentencing would happen. It should be quick, maybe an hour. Ethan nodded and went back to picking pepperoni off his slice. I asked if he was sure about reading his statement, and he said yes, he needed to do it. That morning, Ethan wore his only suit, the one from his cousin's wedding last year. It was a little short in the sleeves now, but he looked older somehow, more serious. I wore my black dress and tried to eat toast, but couldn't swallow. Daniel met us at the courthouse with his new wife, Shirley. I was grateful for the support, even if things were awkward between us. Shirley squeezed my hand and said she was proud of Ethan for being brave. He managed a small smile. The courthouse was busier than I expected. Catherine met us in the lobby and walked us to a small room to wait. She explained that Mia would enter her plea first, then the judge would ask for statements before sentencing. She said Ethan could change his mind at any time about speaking. He clutched his folder and said he was ready. We sat on uncomfortable benches while other cases were called. A man got probation for theft. A woman got community service for fraud. Normal crimes that didn't involve children. Finally, they called Mia's case. We filed into the courtroom and sat behind the prosecutor. I made Ethan sit between me and Daniel so he'd feel protected. Mia was already at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit. Her hair was pulled back and she looked smaller than I remembered. She kept her eyes down as the judge read the charges. When asked how she pleaded, she said guilty in a voice so quiet the judge made her repeat it. My stomach clenched at hearing her admit what she'd done. The prosecutor summarized the evidence. The photos, the messages, the grooming behavior. Each detail felt like a punch to my gut even though I'd heard it all before. The judge asked Mia if she understood what she was admitting to, and she said yes. Her lawyer talked about her accepting responsibility and getting therapy. He mentioned her lack of prior record like that somehow made it better. The whole time Mia stared at her hands folded on the table. Then it was time for victim statements. The prosecutor called Ethan's name and he stood up slowly. His hands shook as he unfolded his paper. Daniel put his hand on my knee to stop my leg from bouncing. Ethan walked to the the podium and adjusted the microphone. He looked so young standing there, but his voice was steady when he started reading. He talked about trust and manipulation, about feeling special and then feeling dirty, about the confusion of someone you cared about hurting you. His voice only cracked once, when he said he'd never trust the same way again. When Ethan finished, there wasn't a sound in the courtroom. Even the bailiff looked affected. The judge thanked him for his courage, and Ethan walked back to us with his head high. I grabbed his hand as he sat down and didn't let go. Mia was crying now, her shoulders shaking. Her lawyer whispered something, but she shook her head. The judge asked if she wanted to make a statement, and she stood up. I tensed, ready to cover Ethan's ears if needed, but Mia just apologized. She said she was sick and getting help, that she never meant to hurt anyone but knew she did. She looked at Ethan when she said she was sorry for stealing his innocence. Then she sat down and went back to staring at her hands. The judge took a few minutes to review everything while we sat in tense silence. When he came back, he accepted the plea deal. 2 years in prison, 5 years probation, lifetime registration as an intimacy offender, and no contact with minors, including through third parties. The bailiff led Mia out in handcuffs. She looked back once and I saw something in her eyes. Maybe regret, maybe just sadness. Then she was gone and it was over. We sat there for a moment before Catherine said we could leave. In the hallway, Ethan started crying. Not sad tears, but relief. Daniel and I hugged him from both sides while Shirley rubbed his back. Catherine said he'd done an amazing thing, and that his statement would be part of the court record forever, maybe helping other kids. Outside the courthouse, the sun was shining. It felt wrong somehow, like it should be raining after what we'd just been through. Ethan asked if we could get burgers and milkshakes, suddenly starving. We went to the same place we'd gone after the police station, but this time he finished his whole meal. He even stole some of my fries. Daniel and Shirley joined us, and we talked about normal things. The robotics competition, summer plans, a movie everyone wanted to see. It felt like the first normal moment in months. That night, Ethan slept better than he had since everything started. I checked on him around midnight and found him sprawled across his bed, finally looking peaceful. I stood in his doorway thinking about everything we'd survived. In the morning, he had therapy with Dr. Lynn. She'd already heard about the hearing and had a special session planned to process everything. I dropped him off and went to get coffee, finally feeling like I could breathe again. The next few weeks were about finding our new normal. Ethan went back to school full-time and even started hanging out with friends on weekends. The robotics team began planning for next year's competition. He still had therapy every week, and some days were harder than others. Sometimes he'd get quiet and I'd know he was thinking about everything, but more often he was just a regular teenager worried about homework and video games. We were healing, slowly but surely, one day at a time.